My sister stole my boat, and my parents helped her do it because they said she was too difficult to fight fair. They left me on a deserted sandbar in the middle of the ocean with no food, no water, and no way back to civilization. As I watched them sail away on my yacht, my mother called out over the loudspeaker that this was just a hard reset for my attitude. My father signed my life away just to keep the peace, but what they did not know was that I had a tracking device they could never find, and I was about to turn their dream vacation into a federal prison sentence. Before I tell you how I survived the rising tides and reclaimed my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the one person in your family who always had to be the bigger person until you finally snapped. I woke up coughing, the taste of salt water burning the back of my throat. My head felt heavy like it was stuffed with cotton, a lingering side effect of whatever they had slipped into my drink. I tried to sit up, but my hands sank deep into wet, shifting sand. I blinked against the harsh Bahamian sun, trying to make sense of the world spinning around me. The first thing I saw was the white wake of a boat cutting through the turquoise water. And not just any boat. It was the Obsidian Pearl, my boat. The 80-foot vessel I had spent 3 years restoring from a rusted hull into a masterpiece of marine engineering. It was moving away from me, its engines roaring a low, powerful hum that I knew by heart. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling as the water rushed over my ankles. "Wait!" I screamed, my voice cracking and dry. "Come back! You cannot leave me here!" But the boat did not slow down. Instead, I saw figures on the aft deck. Even from 500 meters away, I recognized the neon pink bikini. It was my sister, Latrice. She was leaning against the railing, holding a flute of champagne, my vintage Dom Perignon that I had been saving for a special occasion. Standing next to her was her husband, Chad. I watched as he raised his hand high in the air and extended his middle finger towards me. It was a gesture of pure malice. They were not just leaving me behind. They were celebrating it. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp, cutting through the haze of the drugs. I looked down at my feet. The water was already higher than it had been when I first opened my eyes. I spun around, scanning my surroundings. This was not an island. It was a sandbar, a temporary strip of sand that only existed at low tide. I checked the horizon and the position of the sun. The tide was coming in fast. In less than 6 hours, this entire patch of sand would be under 5 feet of ocean. This was not a prank. This was not a lesson. This was an execution. I patted my pockets frantically. My phone was gone. My wallet was gone. My emergency flare gun was gone. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the terrifying realization that my own family had decided my life was less valuable than a luxury yacht. I screamed again, a raw, guttural sound of betrayal that was swallowed instantly by the vast indifference of the ocean. My mind flashed back to 2 hours ago. It felt like a lifetime. We were anchored in a calm bay, the water glistening like glass. The mood on the boat had been strangely tense all morning. I should have known something was wrong when my mother, Patrice, offered to make me a drink. She never served anyone. She expected to be served. But she had walked over to where I was checking the navigation charts, a tall glass of fresh orange juice in her hand, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Here, Renee," she had said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You have been working so hard on the engines all morning. Drink this. You look exhausted." I hesitated. We had been arguing for days about Latrice wanting to borrow the boat for her influencer's party. But I took the glass. I wanted to believe that this trip was what my father Vernon had promised, a chance to heal, a chance to be a family again. Dad had walked up behind me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, almost restraining. "Listen to your mother, Renee. Take a nap. Let Chad take the wheel for a while. He needs the practice if he's going to get his license." I took a long sip of the juice. It tasted slightly bitter, but I assumed it was just the pulp. Within minutes, the world had started to tilt. My limbs felt like lead weights. The charts in front of me began to blur. I remembered stumbling, reaching out for the table to steady myself. I looked up at my mother, confused. "Mom, I feel dizzy," I had mumbled, my tongue thick and clumsy. She did not rush to help me. She did not call for help. She just stood there, watching me fall with a cold, detached expression. As darkness pulled me under, I heard Chad laughing in the background. And then the last thing I heard before the silence took over was my mother's voice, distorted by the boat loudspeaker system, as they lowered my unconscious body into the lifeboat. She had said, "Consider this a reset button, Renee. When you wake up, maybe you will learn to share." Share. They wanted me to share my life work with a sister who had never worked a day in her life. Now, standing on this disappearing strip of sand, with the water lapping at my knees and the sharks beginning to circle in the deeper water, I realized the truth. They did not want me to learn. They wanted me gone. But as I reached into the hidden pocket of my cargo shorts, my fingers brushed against cold metal. They had taken my phone. They had taken my flare gun. But they had forgotten about my dive watch. The one with the emergency satellite beacon. I was not going to die here. I was going to survive. And when I got back to shore, I was going to unleash a storm that would drown them all. The ocean was not waiting for me to make peace with my fate. The water had risen past my calves and was now swirling around my knees, pulling at the fabric of my cargo shorts with a greedy, persistent force. I stood on the highest point of the sandbar, but even that was shrinking by the second. The reality of my situation crashed down on me harder than the waves. My family did not just leave me in a difficult spot. They left me in a grave that was actively being dug by the tide. I jammed my hands into my pockets, praying for a miracle. My fingers scrabbled frantically against the wet, heavy cotton. Nothing. No rectangular shape of a phone, no survival whistle. My breath hitched in my chest. They had stripped me of everything. Then my right thumb grazed something cold and hard. I pulled it out. It was my titanium folding knife. My father hated this knife. He used to tell me that ladies do not carry weapons and that I should carry lipstick instead. But today, that lipstick would be useless, and this knife was the only thing standing between me and total helplessness. It was a tool of my trade, resistant to salt water and sharp enough to cut through steel cable. I gripped the handle tight until my knuckles turned white. Panic began to rise in my throat like bile, but I swallowed it down. Panic is a death sentence in the open water. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds and forced my heart rate to slow. I am not just a victim. I am a marine architect. I know the physics of this ocean better than anyone in my family knows their own names. I opened my eyes and scanned the horizon with surgical precision. To the east, there was nothing but the endless, unforgiving Atlantic. If I swam that way, I would never be seen again. To the south, The current was chopping violently, creating a riptide that would drag a professional swimmer under in minutes. But to the west, about 1.5 miles away, I saw it. A dark, jagged silhouette cutting through the blinding glare of the sun. A rock formation. It was not a resort. It was not comfortable. But it was high ground. It was survival. I looked down at my feet. The water was now licking at my thighs. I did the math in my head instantly. The tide was rising at a rate of 6 inches every 20 minutes. This sandbar would be completely submerged in less than 2 hours, 1.5 miles, in a swimming pool that is 40 laps, a morning workout. But out here, with the current fighting me and the threat of predators beneath the surface, it was a marathon for my life. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the salty air. I looked one last time at the empty horizon where the obsidian pearl had disappeared. They thought I would curl up here and cry until the water took me. They thought Renee the boring mechanic would simply fade away. They were wrong. I secured the knife into the waistband of my shorts and tied it tight with a strip of fabric from my shirt. I stepped forward, plunging into the deeper water. The race was on, and I had no intention of losing. The transition from the solid sandbar to the crushing depth of the Atlantic was instantaneous. One moment I was standing on shifting ground, and the next I was suspended in a world of endless, terrifying blue. The silence of the open ocean is heavy. It presses against your eardrums and screams that you do not belong here. I forced my body into a rhythm. Front crawl, head down, rotate, breathe. Every stroke was a battle against the voice in my head that said I was going to die alone. My family was probably opening another bottle of wine right now, laughing about the difficult daughter they finally got rid of. That anger became my fuel. I kicked harder, pushing my body through the resistance of the water. Then the rhythm of the ocean changed. It was subtle at first, a displacement of pressure against my left side, a shadow where there should have been only clear water. I stopped swimming and treaded water, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 10 feet below me, a gray shape was moving. It was not aimless. It was hunting. A dorsal fin sliced the surface 20 yards away. Short, broad, aggressive. Bull shark. In my line of work, recovering shipwrecks, I have learned one thing about bull sharks. They are the pit bulls of the sea. They are territorial, unpredictable, and they bite first to ask questions later. Instinct screamed at me to thrash, to swim faster, to panic. But panic is a dinner bell for predators. I forced my limbs to go still. Do not act like prey. Do not splash. I reached into my waistband and pulled out the titanium knife. The metal glinted in the filtered sunlight. It looked pathetic against a 600-pound killing machine, but it was all I had. The shadow turned upward. It was coming to investigate the intruder. I curled my body slightly, protecting my vital organs, holding the knife outward as a warning. I watched the beast rise. It was massive, a wall of muscle and teeth moving with terrifying grace. It did not attack head-on. It performed a test pass. The shark surged forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. I braced myself. The massive gray flank brushed against my right calf. Shark skin is made of dermal denticles, which are essentially microscopic teeth. It felt like coarse sandpaper being dragged across my flesh with the force of a truck. The pain was sharp and immediate. The shark turned away, disappearing back into the deep blue gloom. But as I looked down, I saw it. A cloud of red blooming in the crystal clear water. Blood. The contact had shredded the skin of my lower leg. The scent of copper filled the water. I knew I had seconds, not minutes. Blood does not just attract the shark that bit you. It calls every predator within a mile radius. I ignored the stinging pain in my leg. I gripped the knife tighter and resumed my swim. I had to reach those rocks before the test pass turned into a feeding frenzy. I dragged my body over the last ridge of razor-sharp coral and collapsed onto the hard, uneven surface of the rock formation. My skin felt like it was on fire. The salt water had seeped into every cut and scrape, turning my legs into a map of stinging agony. But I was out of the water. I was alive. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air, as the last rays of the sun disappeared below the horizon. The transition was brutal. The tropical heat vanished instantly, replaced by a biting Atlantic wind that cut through my wet clothes like a knife. Hypothermia was the new enemy. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to conserve whatever body heat I had left. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably, but my mind was strangely silent. The panic of the afternoon had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, crystal-clear clarity. I stared up at the vast indifference of the stars. Somewhere out there, miles away, my family was likely sitting in the climate-controlled lounge of the Obsidian Pearl. They were probably drinking my wine, eating the food I paid for, and congratulating themselves on finally getting rid of the problem child. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They took my phone. They took my wallet. They took my dignity. But in their arrogance and their obsession with surface-level beauty, they made a fatal calculation. I lifted my left wrist. Glinting in the moonlight was my watch. It was not a delicate diamond bracelet or a gold bangle like my sister wore. It was a Breitling Emergency, heavy, titanium, and unapologetically industrial. My mother hated this watch. She called it ugly. She said it looked like a man's tool and begged me to wear something more feminine. My father laughed at it, saying I wasted $18,000 on a toy just to look tough. To them, it was just an ugly accessory. They were too ignorant to know what it actually was. This was not just a timekeeper. It was a dual-frequency distress beacon with a built-in microtransmitter. It was designed for pilots and deep-sea explorers, the ultimate insurance policy for when things go wrong in the middle of nowhere. I sat up, ignoring the pain in my muscles. With steady, shaking fingers, I gripped the large, unscrewed safety cap on the lower right side of the case. I twisted it counterclockwise. It gave way with a reassuring mechanical click. I pulled the cap free, extending the coiled wire antenna to its full length. It looked like a thin silver hair stretching toward the sky. I did not need a phone signal. I did not need Wi-Fi. By deploying this antenna, I had just turned my wrist into a broadcasting station, sending a distress signal on the 121.5 megahertz frequency directly to the Cospas Sarsat satellite network. I held my arm up, aiming the antenna at the open sky. In silence, I visualized the signal shooting up into space, bouncing off a satellite and beaming down to the Search and Rescue Command Center in Miami. My family thought they had left me in a black hole where no one could hear me scream. They forgot that I am an engineer. I do not scream. I broadcast. The signal was out. The clock was ticking. And their time was officially running out. Sector Miami Command Center was a fortress of screens and silent tension. At 0500 hours, the room was dimly lit, save for the glow of radar monitors and digital maps. Operations Specialist Miller stared at the sudden spike on his monitor. A distress signal had just pierced the static. It was not a generic boat beacon. It was a 406 megahertz satellite burst with a 1.5 homing signal. The digital signature resolved instantly on the screen. Registered to Renee Jenkins, Marine Architect, U.S. citizen. Miller hit the red alert button. "We have a confirmed distress signal in Sector 4. Scramble the bird!" Miles away, I lay shivering on the jagged rock. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. My consciousness was fading. The cold had seeped into my marrow, and my leg was throbbing with a dull, sickening heat from the shark burn. I closed my eyes, accepting that I might not wake up. Then I felt it, a vibration in the rock beneath me. It started as a low hum and grew into a rhythmic thumping that vibrated in my chest before I even saw the source. Thump, thump, thump. I forced my eyes open. A black shape crusted the horizon, backlit by the rising sun. It grew larger, transforming into the distinct silhouette of an MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter. The orange and white paint scheme of the United States Coast Guard shone like a beacon of absolute power. It roared overhead, the sheer force of its rotors whipping the ocean surface into a frenzy of white foam. To anyone else, it was a rescue vehicle. To me, it was a chariot of justice. The helicopter hovered 50 feet above me. The side door slid open. A figure in a wetsuit and helmet leaned out. I watched as the rescue swimmer dropped from the cable, plunging into the turbulent water below. He swam toward the rock with powerful, efficient strokes, fighting the current that had almost killed me. He pulled himself onto the ledge, water streaming from his gear. He looked like a superhero, but I did not feel relief. I felt a cold, hard resolve crystallizing in my chest. He knelt beside me, checking my vitals with practiced hands. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Davis. You are safe now. We are going to get you to a hospital." He reached for the radio on his shoulder to call for the basket. I grabbed his wrist. My grip was weak, but my eyes were burning with an intensity that made him pause. I pulled myself up, ignoring the screaming pain in my leg. I needed him to hear me clearly over the roar of the engine. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not cry. I did not ask for water. I did not say thank you. I shouted, "Do not take me to a hospital. Take me to a federal agent. I am reporting an act of piracy." Davis looked at me stunned. He had rescued stranded sailors and injured tourists, but he had never seen a shipwreck victim look so dangerous. He nodded slowly and spoke into his headset. "Command, we have the survivor. She is conscious, and she is demanding federal law enforcement. We are bringing her in." As the basket lifted me into the air, leaving the rock and the rising tide behind, I looked down at the empty ocean one last time. My parents wanted a reset. I was about to give them a revolution. The sterile hum of the medical equipment was the only sound in the private recovery suite at the Naval Hospital. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the tiles while the IV drip pushed fluids into my dehydrated veins. My leg was wrapped in thick gauze, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold rage settling in my chest. The door opened and Marcus Davies walked in. He was the best maritime lawyer in Miami, and right now, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He sat down next to the bed, placing his briefcase on his lap with shaking hands. He looked at my bandaged leg and then at my face. He started to apologize, saying he could not believe my own parents would do this. I cut him off. I did not need pity. I needed a strategy. I asked him the only question that mattered. What is the charge? Marcus took a deep breath and adjusted his glasses. He explained the legal reality. If they just took the boat for a joyride within Florida waters, it is grand theft. It is a messy civil dispute between family members. They might get probation. They might get a slap on the wrist. My hands clenched the bedsheets. Probation was not enough. I wanted them buried. Marcus continued. However, you said they drugged you. You said they dumped you in international waters. That changes everything. If they cross the maritime border into the Bahamas with a stolen vessel that is no longer a domestic dispute, that is piracy. That is federal trafficking. And if they try to sell that boat or forge your signature on a bill of sale while you are missing, that is fraud and conspiracy. We are talking about 20 years in a federal penitentiary. A silence fell over the room. I could see the wheels turning in Marcus's head. He reached for his phone to call the police to announce my rescue. I reached out and grabbed his arm. No. Put the phone away. Marcus looked at me confused. He said we needed to tell the authorities I was safe. I shook my head slowly. If we announce I am alive right now, they will spin the story. They will say it was a prank. They will say they were coming back for me. They will hire a lawyer and plead it down to a misunderstanding. I cannot let that happen. I need them to feel safe. I need them to think they got away with it. I need them to sail that boat into a foreign port and sign their names on a fraudulent contract. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. I am dead. As far as the world is concerned, Renee Jenkins drowned at sea. Do not release a statement. Do not call my parents. Let them enjoy their victory lap. Let them dig their own grave so deep that they can never climb out. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. He closed his briefcase. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. 2 days before I woke up on that sandbar, I was sitting in the private room of the most expensive steakhouse in Miami. The air in the room was so thick with tension, it felt suffocating. My dinner of filet mignon sat untouched on the white tablecloth. Across from me, my sister Latrice was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in perfect rivers of tragedy as she clutched a glass of wine with trembling hands. Beside her sat Chad, her husband. He was staring down into his scotch glass, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. He looked pale, sweating through his designer suit like a man who knew his time was up. Latrice took a shaky breath and dropped the bomb. She told us that Chad had made a mistake. She called it a bad investment in an overseas real estate venture that went south. She said the partners were dangerous men who did not care about contracts or extensions. They wanted their money back by the end of the week, or there would be severe physical consequences. The number she whispered was $500,000. I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. I knew Chad better than my parents did. There were no overseas real estate partners. There was only a high-stakes poker room in Atlantic City and a loan shark who did not have a real estate license. Chad was a gambler, not an investor. But I watched my mother Patrice gasp and cover her mouth in horror. I watched my father Vernon shake his head with grave concern, immediately calculating how to save the family reputation. They swallowed the lie whole, because Chad was the white son-in-law they adored, the trophy they thought validated our social standing. Then Latrice turned her tear-filled eyes toward me. The pivot came faster than I expected. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She said there was a solution. She said I had an asset that was just sitting in the marina collecting dust. She was talking about the obsidian pearl. She said that if I sold the yacht immediately to a private buyer Chad knew, we could get cash fast. She said the money would pay off the debt and leave them enough to start over. She called it a loan between sisters. I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. The Obsidian Pearl was not just a boat. It was my masterpiece. I had spent 3 years restoring it from a rusted hull to a multi-million-dollar vessel. It was my business. It was my pride. And they wanted me to liquidate it to cover a gambling debt. I pulled my hand away from hers, slowly and deliberately. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I spoke with the calm, absolute authority of the only person at that table who actually earned her own money. I told her no. I told her that the Obsidian Pearl was not a piggy bank for her husband's reckless habits. I looked directly at Chad, who flinched when I said his name. I told them clearly, that is your husband's debt, not mine. If he wants to play with sharks, he needs to learn how to swim without using my life raft. The silence that followed my refusal was deafening, and in that silence, I saw the look in my mother's eyes shift from worry to a cold, calculating anger. The silence at the table was shattered by the sound of a heavy fist slamming against the mahogany surface. My father, Vernon, did not just hit the table. He tried to break it. The silverware rattled, and the other diners in the restaurant turned their heads in alarm. But Vernon did not care about public scenes, not when his authority was being challenged by the daughter he considered invisible. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl that vibrated with years of accumulated disappointment. You are selfish, Renee. You have always been selfish. You sit there with your fancy job and your empty apartment, hoarding resources like a miser. What do you need that boat for anyway? It is just a pile of scrap metal you dragged up from the ocean floor. I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. Scrap metal. That is what he called the Obsidian Pearl. He saw a rusted hull. He did not see the $200,000 I spent on Burmese teak decking. He did not see the twin Caterpillar engines I rebuilt by hand. He did not see the satellite navigation system that was worth more than his entire house. To him, my work was just dirty mechanic work. It was not real success, because it did not come with a husband and a baby carriage. Vernon pointed a shaking finger at Latrice, who was now dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. Look at your sister, he hissed. She has a husband. She is trying to build a family. She has a future. What do you have, Renee? You have no husband. You have no children. You have nothing but oil stains on your hands and a big, empty boat. Latrice needs this chance. She needs to secure her future. And you are going to deny her that because of some petty jealousy? The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. It was the same narrative I had heard since I was 12. Latrice was the princess who needed protection. I was the mule who existed to pull the carriage. I slowly placed my napkin on the table next to my untouched steak. I did not look at my father. I looked at the check that the waiter had quietly placed near my elbow earlier in the evening. In the past, I would have picked it up. I would have paid for the privilege of being insulted, just to keep the peace. But tonight, something inside me finally broke. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress with deliberate precision. I am not jealous, Dad, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am exhausted, and I am done paying for people who hate me. I grabbed my purse and turned my heel. Vernon shouted after me, "If you walk out that door, Renee, do not bother coming to Sunday service. You are tearing this family apart." I did not look back. I walked through the crowded dining room, head held high, ignoring the whispers of the other patrons. As I stepped out into the humid Miami night, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I thought I had just ended a family dinner. I did not know I had just started a war. The sun had barely risen when my phone began to buzz on the nightstand. It was 6 a.m. I stared at the screen, seeing my mother name flashing urgently. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My mother never called this early, unless it was a catastrophe. I swiped answer, bracing myself for another lecture about my selfishness. But instead of anger, I heard sobbing. Deep, hysterical sobbing that sounded terrifyingly real. "Renee, you have to come. It is your father. He collapsed." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The anger from the restaurant evaporated instantly, replaced by the primal fear of a child losing a parent. I asked her what happened. Her voice was trembling as she explained. She said that after I stormed out of dinner, Vernon had been so distraught that his chest seized up. She said the ambulance came. She said the doctors were calling it a severe angina attack brought on by acute stress. The implication was clear, even though she did not say the words. I did this. My refusal to sell the boat had almost killed him. She put my father on the phone. His voice sounded weak, raspy, and stripped of all its usual dominance. It was a sound I had never heard before. He told me he was scared. He told me that lying in that hospital bed made him realize that money did not matter. He said he did not want to die with his family at war. "Renee, please," he whispered into the phone. "I just want one weekend. One weekend for us to be a family again. No talk of debts, no talk of selling the boat. Just take us to the Bahamas. Let me see the ocean with my girls one last time before I go." I closed my eyes. My logical brain was screaming that this was convenient timing. But my heart was breaking. I was the tough, independent daughter, but underneath that armor, I was still desperate for my father's approval. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that a brush with death had changed him. I let out a long breath, effectively signing my own death warrant. I told him yes. I told him to rest and that I would prep the obsidian pearl for a trip this weekend. "Thank you, baby girl," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I thought I was being a good daughter, granting a dying man his wish. I did not know that the heart attack was staged. I did not know that while I was packing my bags, my brother-in-law was buying illegal sedatives. I was walking straight into a trap set by the people who were supposed to love me the most. The morning of our departure, the marina was buzzing with activity, but the atmosphere on the dock next to the Obsidian Pearl felt strangely heavy. I was on the aft deck, checking the fuel levels and running the final diagnostics on the twin engines, when a white rental van pulled up to the slip. Chad jumped out of the driver's seat. He looked frantic. He was sweating through his polo shirt even though it was only 8 in the morning and the ocean breeze was cool. He ran around to the back of the van and threw the doors open. I expected to see a couple of duffel bags. We were only supposed to be going to the Bahamas for a 3-day weekend. A few swimsuits, a change of clothes, and maybe a toiletry bag. That is all anyone needed. But what Chad began to unload made me stop what I was doing and walk down the gangway. He dragged out 4 massive hard-shell suitcases, the kind of luggage you take when you are moving to another continent, not going on a weekend boat ride. They were enormous, bulging at the seams, and looked heavy enough to contain bricks. He was struggling to lift them onto the dock, his face turning red with exertion. I walked up to him, wiping the grease from my hands onto a rag. "Chad, what is all this? We are gone for 72 hours. You packed enough for a year." Chad froze. He looked at me with wide, darting eyes like a deer caught in headlights. He quickly stepped in front of the bags as if trying to shield them from my view. "It is fishing gear, Renee," he snapped, his voice pitch higher than usual. "High-end, deep-sea equipment. It is fragile, and it takes up a lot of space. Do not touch it." I frowned. I know what fishing gear looks like. Rods go in tubes, reels go in cases, tackle goes in boxes. You do not put a deep-sea rod inside a Samsonite suitcase. I reached out to grab the handle of the nearest bag just to help him load it. "Let me help you with that," I said. He slapped my hand away. It was a sharp, aggressive motion that shocked me. "Do not touch my stuff, Renee," I said. "It is fragile. I will load it myself." Just then, my father, Vernon, walked up the dock slowly, clutching his chest in a performance of frailty that I now know was an Oscar-worthy act. "Renee, leave the boy alone," Vernon wheezed. "He wants to catch a marlin for me. Let him bring his gear. Stop interrogating everyone and get the boat started. My heart needs the sea air." I backed off, holding up my hands in surrender. I watched Chad drag those heavy cases up the ramp, the wheels groaning under the weight. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself to stop ruining the trip. If I had just unzipped one of those bags right there on the dock, I would have seen the truth. There were no fishing reels inside. Those cases were packed with their birth certificates, their social security cards, their winter coats, and every piece of jewelry they owned. They were not packing for a vacation. They were packing for a permanent relocation to South America. They brought everything they owned because they knew they were never coming back to Miami. And they knew I was never coming back at all. The morphine drip was doing its best to dull the throbbing in my leg, but nothing could dull the sharp focus of my mind. I sat up in the hospital bed and pulled the heavy industrial laptop onto the tray table. My family thought they were smart. They thought that by tossing my iPhone into the Atlantic, they had severed my connection to the world. They thought the obsidian pearl was just a vessel of wood and fiberglass. They had no idea it was a digital fortress that I had designed to survive the most hostile environments on Earth, including them. I opened the terminal window. The screen was black, reflecting my pale, exhausted face. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I did not log in through the standard guest Wi-Fi that Chad was currently abusing. I accessed the hidden partition of the boat operating system. I typed in the command that I hoped I would never have to use. Ghost Protocol, initiate. The system bypassed the main control panel on the bridge. It locked out any local notifications so the screens on the boat would remain unchanged. To my family, everything would look normal. But in the digital background, I was seizing total control. The laptop screen flickered once, then twice, as the Starlink satellite receiver, hidden in the radar arch, established a secure, encrypted handshake with my hospital room. Then the darkness on my screen vanished, replaced by a grid of 12 high-definition windows. The feed was crystal clear. It was as if the ceiling of the hospital room had dissolved, transporting me back onto the deck of my own ship. I saw the aft deck, where my mother was lounging on the sunpad, holding a glass of my best vintage red wine. I saw the main salon, where my father was walking around with his shoes on, grinding dirt into the white wool carpet I had imported from New Zealand. He was looking at the paintings on the wall, not appreciating the art, but calculating how much he could sell them for. But the feed that made my stomach turn was camera number 4, the master suite, my sanctuary. I watched in silence as Latrice opened my closet doors. She was pulling out my silk dresses, holding them up to her body and spinning around. Chad was sitting on the edge of my bed, dumping the contents of my jewelry box onto the duvet. They were laughing. I turned up the audio gain. The microphone, disguised as a smoke detector above the bed, picked up every sound. "Look at this ring, babe," Chad said, holding up my grandmother emerald. "This alone will cover my buy-in at the table next week." Latrice laughed, tossing one of my blazers onto the floor. "She does not need it anymore where she is going." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. They were not just stealing. They were erasing me. They were dividing up my life before my body was even cold. I moved the cursor to the bottom right of the screen. I hovered over the red button labeled Record All. I clicked it. The red dot began to pulse silently in the corner of my screen. Every word, every theft, every confession. It was all being streamed to a cloud server that they could not touch. They wanted to be rich. They wanted to be famous. They wanted a life of luxury. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, watching my sister steal my clothes. I was about to give them a starring role in the most damning evidence tape in maritime history. While I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm fighting off infection, my sister was throwing the party of the century on my dime. Through the high-definition camera feed on my laptop, I watched the scene unfold in the main salon of the Obsidian Pearl. The room was designed for elegance, with Italian leather sofas and hand-polished teak floors. But Latrice and Chad were turning it into a frat house. Music was blasting so loud the bass was vibrating the camera lens. Latrice was wearing a white silk robe that she had stolen from my closet. She held her phone up high, finding her best angle for an Instagram live stream. I watched the comments roll in on the side of her screen. Her followers were eating it up, oblivious to the crime she had just committed. "Hey guys," Latrice shouted over the music, her voice slurring slightly. "Welcome to my new life. We finally cut out the toxic, negative energy that was holding us back. Sometimes you just have to hit reset and claim the blessings you deserve." She spun around, showcasing the interior of the yacht. "Look at this view. This is what hard work looks like, baby. Manifestation is real." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Hard work. She had never worked a day in her life. The only thing she manifested was a felony charge. Chad walked into the frame, shirtless, holding a bottle of wine. My stomach dropped. It was a Chateau Margaux, 1787. A bottle I had bought at an auction for $5,000, intending to save it for my wedding day or a major career milestone. He was not even using a glass. He was swigging it straight from the bottle like it was cheap beer. "Pop that bottle, baby," Latrice cheered. "To us, to the new captains of the Obsidian Pearl." Chad laughed, red wine dripping down his chin and staining the white wool carpet. He wiped it with the back of his hand and burped loudly. "To us, and to Renee. May she enjoy her long vacation on the beach." They clinked the bottle against the phone screen, laughing hysterically. They were treating my life work like a playground. They were drinking my future and spilling it on the floor. But what they did not know was that the wine they were guzzling was the least expensive thing they were going to pay for. Every drop they spilled was being recorded. Every lie they told to their followers was evidence. They were toasting to their new life, but they were actually celebrating their own funeral, and I was the one writing the eulogy. The Atlantic Ocean does not care about your ego. It does not care if you are wearing a designer suit or if you think you are a big shot because you stole a yacht. It only respects competence. And as I watched the live feed from my hospital bed, I saw exactly what happens when arrogance meets physics. The sea state was building. 3 to 4 foot swells were rolling in from the east. For the Obsidian Pearl, this should have been nothing. I had installed a state-of-the-art Seakeeper gyroscopic stabilization system deep in the hull. It spins a heavy flywheel in a vacuum to counter the roll of the waves, keeping the deck perfectly flat, even in rough water. But there was a catch. You have to actually turn it on. I looked at the telemetry data on the left side of my laptop screen. The stabilizer status light was blinking a furious red. Inactive. On the bridge camera, Chad was standing at the helm, wearing a captain hat he must have bought at a souvenir shop. He was holding a beer in one hand and steering with the other, looking out at the horizon like he was posing for a magazine cover. He had no idea that the boat was currently at the mercy of the laws of buoyancy. Then the first real wave hit. It took the boat broadside. Because the stabilizers were off, the 80-foot vessel did not cut through the water. It rolled. Hard. I switched the camera view to the main salon. It was absolute carnage. The boat listed 30 degrees to the port side. The custom crystal vases I had secured with museum wax held for a moment, and then snapped free, shattering into a million pieces on the teak floor. My mother, who had been trying to pour herself another drink, was thrown across the room, landing in a heap on the leather sofa, while the bottle of red wine flew through the air and exploded against the white wall. Latrice screamed. It was a high-pitched shriek of genuine terror. "We are sinking! Chad, do something!" Back on the bridge, Chad was in full panic mode. He dropped his beer, which foamed all over the instrument panel. He started mashing buttons on the touchscreen interface with his fist. He did not know the menu system. He did not know the difference between the bilge pump and the radar. "Stop rolling, you stupid piece of junk!" he screamed. He grabbed the wheel and jerked it violently to the right, which only made the momentum worse. The boat groaned under the stress. Frustrated and humiliated, he pulled his leg back and delivered a violent kick to the center console, right below the throttle quadrant. There was a sickening crunch of plastic and glass. "This boat is trash," he yelled, breathless and sweating. "It is nothing but broken garbage." I sat back against my pillows and let out a cold, dry laugh. The pain in my legs seemed to vanish for a moment, replaced by the sweet taste of vindication. I leaned into the microphone of my laptop, as if he could hear me. "That was not garbage, Chad. That panel you just destroyed houses the thermal imaging processor and the forward-looking sonar interface. You just kicked a hole through a $30,000 sensor array." I watched him limp away, clutching his foot. He had just added another zero to the bill he would never be able to pay. He thought he was the captain, but he was just the architect of his own destruction. I switched the camera feed to the upper sun deck, hoping to see even a flicker of remorse. Maybe my mother was crying. Maybe my father was pacing the deck, worrying about my safety. But what I saw froze the blood in my veins. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the white fiberglass of the Obsidian Pearl. My mother, Patrice, was stretched out on a chaise lounge, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized designer sunglasses. She looked like she was on the cover of a travel magazine. She reached out and took a sip of her cocktail, the condensation dripping onto her manicured hand. She let out a long, exaggerated sigh of contentment. "Vernon," she said, her voice lazy and slurred from the heat and the alcohol. "Do you feel that? The air just feels lighter, doesn't it? Without Renee hovering over us with her rules and her sour face, I can finally breathe. She always makes everything so heavy, always talking about maintenance schedules and fuel costs. She never knows how to just enjoy life. She ruins every vacation with her attitude." My father, Vernon, was sitting opposite her reading a yachting magazine he had taken from the rack. He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that I had heard my entire childhood. He did not look up. He just turned the page, completely unbothered. "You are right, dear," he said. "She takes herself too seriously. She thinks the world revolves around her and that little engineering degree of hers. Leaving her on that sandbar was the best thing we could do for her. It is tough love. Tough love." I stared at the screen, gripping the edges of my hospital bed. They called abandoning me in shark-infested waters tough love. Vernon continued his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "She needs a reality check. Let her sit there for a couple of days. Let her get hungry. Let her get thirsty. Let the sun blister her skin a little. When we go back to pick her up on Sunday, she will be humble. She will be grateful just to see us. She will realize that family is the most important thing, and she will sign those transfer papers without a peep. She just needs to be broken a little bit to fit back into the family." My mother laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. "You are such a good father, Vernon. You always know what is best for her, even when she fights it. I hope she is thinking about her selfishness right now." I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it was not from sadness. It was from pure, unadulterated rage. They did not think they were criminals. They thought they were righteous. They truly believed that my life, my safety, and my dignity were things they could trade for a quiet afternoon. They were not worried that the tide might drown me. They were just happy I was silent. They were relieved I was gone. And in that moment, I realized that the parents I had been trying to impress my whole life did not exist. These people were strangers, and strangers do not get mercy. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the bridge of the Obsidian Pearl. Down on the main deck, the music was still thumping, but Chad had slipped away to the upper helm station seeking privacy. He thought he was alone. He locked the glass door behind him and pulled a burner phone from his pocket. He did not know that the high-definition camera hidden in the smoke detector above his head was zooming in on the screen of his phone, capturing every digit he dialed. I watched from my hospital bed as the connection was made. The audio feed was crystal clear, filtering out the wind and the engine noise. Chad was pacing back and forth, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his expensive linen shirt. He looked like a man who was trying to play gangster, but was terrified of the game. He spoke into the phone, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Yo, it is me. I have the package. It is pristine, just like I told you. 80 feet, custom refit, Caterpillar engines. It is sitting in the water, ready to go." I could hear the voice on the other end of the line. It was a scratchy, deep baritone belonging to a man named Rico, a known fence in the Miami underworld, whom the FBI had been trying to nail for years. Rico asked the only question that mattered. "What about the paperwork? Is it clean?" Chad hesitated. He looked out at the ocean, biting his lip. "The paperwork is being handled. The owner is out of the picture. Permanently. She is not coming back. I am working on the bill of sale right now. It will look legitimate, but I need to move this thing fast. I cannot sit on it." Rico laughed a dry, cynical sound. A hot boat with no title. That is risky, my friend. I cannot give you market value. Chad sounded desperate. I do not need market value. It is worth 4.5. I will give it to you for 2. 2 million. Cash. Tonight. Unmarked bills. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard. I highlighted that section of the audio file. Out of the picture. Permanently. He had just confirmed on tape that he believed I was dead and that he was actively conspiring to sell stolen property. That was conspiracy to commit wire fraud and trafficking in stolen goods. Rico paused on the other end. Bring it to the private dock at Star Island at midnight. If I see a single cop, I sink the boat and you with it. Do you understand? Chad pumped his fist in the air as if he had just won the lottery. Understood. Midnight. I will be there. He hung up the phone and let out a sigh of relief, oblivious to the red recording light blinking on my screen miles away. He thought he was about to become a millionaire. He did not realize he had just scheduled a meeting with federal agents. I saved the file and forwarded it directly to the special agent in charge. The trap was set for midnight. Under the cover of darkness, while Chad was busy making illegal deals on the phone, my sister Latrice piloted the small motorized dinghy back to the mainland. She docked at the private pier of my waterfront estate, not as a guest, but as a thief. I watched the security feed from my hospital bed as she stepped onto my lawn. She did not look fearful. She looked entitled. She marched up to the back of the house where the large French glass doors looked out over the pool. She did not even try to pick the lock or find the spare key I kept under the planter. She simply picked up a heavy, decorative garden stone and smashed the glass. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the empty house, but Latrice did not flinch. She stepped through the broken frame, her shoes crunching on the shards of glass that littered my living room floor. She knew exactly where to go. She ran straight to my home office, pushing aside my drafting table and tearing the painting off the wall. Behind it was my wall safe. She typed in the code, 1960, our parents' wedding year. She smirked as the light turned green and the heavy steel door swung open. But her smile vanished instantly. The safe was empty. I had moved the boat title, the property deeds, and the emergency cash to a secure bank vault 3 months ago. Latrice screamed in frustration. She swept my expensive architectural models off the desk, sending them crashing to the floor in a tantrum of pure rage. She needed those papers to sell the boat, but she was empty-handed. Then her eyes drifted down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Her expression changed from anger to greed. If she could not steal my business, she would steal my lifestyle. She kicked open the door to my walk-in closet. This was my sanctuary. It was climate-controlled and lined with cedar shelves holding the rewards of my hard work. Latrice gasped. She grabbed my limited edition Hermes Birkin bag, the one made of Himalayan crocodile skin that cost more than her husband made in 2 years. She threw it over her shoulder. Then she started grabbing everything that glittered. My diamond tennis bracelet, my sapphire earrings, the vintage Cartier watch I bought when I landed my first government contract. She stuffed them all into the bag with a manic energy. She paused in front of the full-length mirror, holding my bag and wearing my jewelry. She preened, posing as if she were walking a red carpet. She muttered to herself that I owed her this. She said that I had too much and she had too little. She did not see a crime. She saw a correction. She hauled the loot back to the dinghy, leaving my home in shambles. She thought she had scored a jackpot. She did not know that the motion sensors in the closet had already logged the time of entry, and that the camera in the hallway had captured her face in perfect 4K resolution. She was adding burglary and grand larceny to her growing list of crimes. Back on the Obsidian Pearl, the atmosphere had shifted from party mode to desperate criminal enterprise. Since Latrice had failed to find the original title in my safe, Chad had to improvise. I watched on the monitor as he turned the dining table of the main salon into a forgery station. He had spread out a blank bill of sale form that he had downloaded from the internet. Next to it was an old birthday card I had given them 3 years ago. It was the only sample of my signature they had. Chad was sweating profusely. His hand was shaking as he held a heavy black ink pen. He was not just signing a paper. He was signing away his freedom, but he was too blinded by greed to see it. He grabbed a piece of scratch paper and practiced the loop of the letter R for the 100th time. He groaned in frustration, slamming his fist on the table. "This is impossible," he hissed. "Her signature is too precise. If the bank looks closely at this, we are done." Latrice walked over to him and placed her hands on his tense shoulders. She was wearing my silk robe and smelling like my perfume. She leaned down and whispered into his ear, not words of caution, but poison. "Baby, look at me. You can do this. You are not forging a signature. You are signing for our future. Think about the penthouse in Brickell. Think about the Ferrari. Think about walking into that country club and telling everyone you are retired. That money is ours. Renee is gone. She does not need it. You are just correcting a mistake." Her words seemed to sedate his anxiety. He took a deep breath. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. He looked at the blank bill of sale with a renewed sense of purpose. He gripped the pen tighter. I watched closely as he put the tip to the paper. He was right-handed. I am left-handed. He was pressing down hard, trying to mimic the flow of my script, but he did not know that forensic handwriting analysis would later detect the difference in pressure points and stroke direction. He was creating evidence that would destroy him. He moved the pen slowly, tracing the curves of my name. Renee Jenkins. When he finished the final S, he lifted the pen with a flourish. He held the document up to the light, inspecting his handiwork. A slow, arrogant smile spread across his face. He looked at Latrice and grinned. "It is perfect. It looks exactly like hers. Maybe even better." Latrice shrieked with delight and clapped her hands. She grabbed the paper and kissed it, leaving a smudge of red lipstick near the dateline. "We did it!" she squealed. "We are technically millionaires right now. Tomorrow morning we hand this to Rico and we never look back." They hugged each other, jumping up and down in the middle of the salon, like children who had just gotten away with stealing a cookie. But they had not stolen a cookie. They had committed felony forgery and wire fraud. And from my hospital bed, I saved the video clip and named the file The Confession. They thought they were signing a check. They had actually just signed their own arrest warrants. The hospital room was cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the humid heat of the Caribbean night. On my screen, the Obsidian Pearl was a peaceful green dot. Everyone on board was asleep, dreaming of the millions they thought they were about to make. They did not know that I was awake, and I was about to turn their luxury getaway into a floating oven. I opened the environmental control subsystem. With a single keystroke, I initiated the total shutdown sequence. I disabled the main generators. I cut the feed to the air conditioning units. I even deactivated the fresh water pumps and the ice makers. I pressed enter. Instantly, the gentle hum of the yacht died. The silence was heavy and absolute. Without the air conditioning cycling the air, the temperature inside the sealed cabins began to climb rapidly. The tropical heat trapped inside the fiberglass hull turned the boat into a greenhouse. Within an hour, the ambient temperature inside the master suite rose to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I watched on the night vision camera as Latrice woke up first. She was gasping for air, clawing at her silk sheets, which were now soaked in sweat. Her expensive makeup was melting off her face, running in dark streaks down her neck. She screamed for Chad, but her voice was hoarse from the sudden dehydration. Chad stumbled into the hallway wearing nothing but boxer shorts, dripping with perspiration. He was disoriented and angry. He banged his fist on the wall control panels, but the screens were dead black. "The stupid boat!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Why is everything broken?" In the galley, the massive Sub-Zero refrigerator had shut down hours ago. The vintage cheeses, the fresh seafood, and the expensive Wagyu beef I had stocked were beginning to sweat and spoil in the heat. The smell of rotting luxury began to permeate the lower decks, mixing with the smell of stagnant air and body odor. My mother, Patrice, emerged from her room looking like a melted wax figure. Her hair was matted to her skull. She was fanning herself frantically with a magazine. "Fix it, Chad!" she screeched. "I cannot breathe in here! I am dying! Do something, you useless man!" Chad spun around, his eyes wild. "Do not call me useless! This is Renee's fault. She bought a lemon. This whole boat is a death trap." Latrice started crying, but she had no tears left, just dry, heaving sobs. "It is so hot. My skin is burning. I need water." But when she turned the tap in the bathroom, nothing came out. I had disabled the pumps. They were floating on an ocean of water, with nothing to drink, trapped in a dark, sweltering metal box. They started screaming at each other, their voices echoing in the suffocating hallway. Chad blamed the wiring. Latrice blamed Chad. My mother blamed the world. I watched from my cool, air-conditioned hospital room and took a sip of ice water. Let them sweat. Let them feel a fraction of the suffering they forced onto me. 3 a.m. is the hour of the wolf. It is the time when the veil between sanity and madness is at its thinnest. On the obsidian pearl, floating in the middle of the pitch-black Atlantic, the silence should have been peaceful. But inside the stifling heat of the master suite, my mother Patrice was already on the edge. The air conditioning had been off for hours, turning the luxury cabin into a suffocating box of stagnant air. She was tossing and turning, tangling herself in the sweat-soaked Egyptian cotton sheets, unable to find a cool spot on the mattress. I sat in my hospital room, illuminated only by the blue glow of my laptop screen. I pulled up the Crestron home automation interface. This system cost me $50,000 to install. It allowed for individual audio control in every single zone of the yacht. My parents always complained that the system was too complicated. They said they just wanted a knob to turn up the radio. They had no idea that the hidden Bowers and Wilkins speakers embedded in the walls and ceiling were capable of creating a 3-dimensional soundscape that could trick the human brain. I did not want to wake them with loud music. That is amateur. I wanted to haunt them. I selected the master bedroom zone. I set the volume to 15%, just loud enough to be heard over the creaking of the ship, but quiet enough to make you doubt your own ears. I opened my sound library and selected a file I had created for an immersive art installation years ago. It was called The Drowning. It started as a low-frequency hum, a vibration that you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. Patrice stopped moving. In the grainy green light of the night vision camera, I saw her eyes snap open. She lay perfectly still, listening. Then I triggered the second layer. The sound of water. Not the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, but the chaotic, terrifying gurgle of water rushing into lungs. It sounded wet and heavy. It sounded like someone gasping for their last breath right next to her ear. Patrice sat bolt upright. Her chest was heaving. She looked around the dark room, her eyes wide with terror. "Vernon," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Vernon, wake up!" My father groaned next to her, rolling over. He was drenched in sweat and irritable. "Go back to sleep, Patrice. It is just the wind." But I made sure it was not the wind. I used the directional audio feature to shift the sound. I made the whispering move from the foot of the bed to the ceiling directly above her head. "Mom." It was a synthesized whisper generated by my software, but in the dead of night, to a mother who had just abandoned her child, it sounded exactly like me. Patrice let out a strangled gasp. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, pulling the sheet up to her chin, as if a piece of fabric could protect her from the supernatural. "Did you hear that?" she hissed, digging her manicured nails into Vernon's arm. "She is here. Renee is here. She is back." Vernon sat up, angry now. He slapped her hand away. "Stop it, Patrice. Renee is on an island 50 miles away. You are hallucinating because of the heat. Lay down and shut up." He flopped back onto the pillow, turning his back to her. But Patrice could not lay down. I turned up the volume just slightly. The sound of fingernails scratching against fiberglass filled the room. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like someone was trying to claw their way in from the outside. I watched her unravel. This was a woman who prided herself on control, on appearances, on being the matriarch, but now stripped of her comfort, sweating in the dark and haunted by the ghost of her own cruelty, she looked small. She looked pathetic. She started to whimper, covering her ears with her hands, rocking back and forth. She thought the ocean was claiming her, just like she let it claim me. She did not know that the ghost was not in the room. The ghost was sitting 5 miles away, holding a laptop and sipping ice water. Sleep tight, Mother. The nightmare is just beginning. The man who stepped onto the aft deck of the Obsidian Pearl did not look like a yacht buyer. He looked like a shark in human skin. His name was Rico, and in the underworld of Miami maritime trafficking, he was a legend. He did not wear a suit. He wore a faded linen shirt and cargo pants, but the way he moved spoke of violence and control. Chad stood nervously by the sliding glass doors, wiping his sweaty palms on his shorts. He tried to puff out his chest to look like the owner of the vessel, but next to Rico, he looked like a terrified child playing dress-up. I watched the encounter through the hidden camera in the salon. Rico did not ask for a tour. He did not care about the teak flooring or the crystal chandeliers. He walked straight to the bridge console. He pulled a small black device from his pocket. It was a radio frequency detector. He swept it over the instrument panel. The device instantly lit up with a furious red blinking light and emitted a high-pitched whine. Rico laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound, like sandpaper on concrete. He turned to Chad with eyes that were completely dead. "You lied to me, amigo. You said this boat was clean. This thing is screaming its location to the sky. It has an active satellite uplink hidden somewhere in the hull." Chad turned pale. He stammered, trying to explain. "No, that is impossible. I turned everything off. I cut the power." Rico grabbed Chad by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the navigation desk. You cut the main power. You did not cut the backup battery. This boat is hot. It is radioactive. If I take this off the dock, the Coast Guard will be on me in 10 minutes. I have to spend 20 grand just to jam the signal and another 50 to strip the trackers. Chad was trembling now. His dream of a $2 million payday was evaporating before his eyes. Look, I will lower the price. $1.5 million. Just take it. Rico released him and smoothed out his shirt with a mock tenderness that was more terrifying than the violence. 1.5 is for a ghost boat, a boat that disappears without a trace. This boat is a liability. I am taking a huge risk just standing here. The price is not $2 million. It is not $1 million. Rico held up 5 fingers. 500,000. Cash. Take it, or I walk away and make an anonymous call to the feds about where you are parked. I saw Chad's knees buckle. $500,000. That would barely cover his gambling debts to the mob. There would be nothing left for the penthouse in Brazil, nothing left for the Ferrari. He would be on the run, broke and desperate. But he looked at the gun tucked into Rico's waistband. He looked at the vast, dark ocean. He realized he had no leverage. He was trapped in a cage of his own making. Fine, Chad whispered, his voice breaking. 500,000. But I need it tonight. Rico shook his head. Number 1, I need to assemble a crew to jam this signal. We do the exchange tomorrow night, right here. But I do not want it to look like a drug deal. I want cover. You said you were having a party, right? Chad nodded, confused. Yes, Latrice posted about a charity gala. Perfect. Rico smiled, showing a gold tooth. Keep the party. Loud music, lots of people, champagne flowing. It distracts the harbor patrol. While your guests are dancing, my men will board from the seaside. We slip you the duffel bag of cash, we disable the tracker, and we take the boat. By the time your guests realize the captain is gone, we will be in international waters. Chad agreed, desperate to salvage whatever he could. He did not know that he had just agreed to the perfect stage for his own destruction. Tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, the guests would arrive. Rico would arrive. And thanks to the recording, I just saved the FBI would arrive too. The party was going to be unforgettable. The modern criminal does not wear a ski mask or hide in the shadows. She wears a designer dress and hides behind a filter on social media. I watched from my hospital bed as my sister Latrice orchestrated the final act of her own destruction with the swipe of a finger. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated my face as I refreshed her Facebook page. She had just posted a new event. The graphic was professionally designed, likely using a template she stole from my computer. It featured a photo of the obsidian pearl glistening in the sunset, with bold gold letters overlaid across the hull. The event was titled the Ocean Preservation Gala, hosted by the Jenkins family. I almost choked on my water. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. The woman who had just dumped her own sister into the ocean to die was now hosting a party to save it. The caption underneath the photo was a masterclass in narcissism. It read, "Join us for an exclusive evening of elegance and philanthropy on our private yacht. We are raising awareness for marine life and celebrating new beginnings. VIP entry only." I scrolled through the guest list. It was not just a party. It was a mobilization of Miami high society. She had invited the city council members. She had invited the local influencers she was desperate to be friends with. She had even invited the chief of police. She thought she was building a cover story. Rico the smuggler had told them to create a distraction. He wanted noise. He wanted crowds. He wanted a reason for a massive yacht to be active at night, so the harbor patrol would not look twice when his men boarded. Latrice took that instruction and turned it into a coronation. She was using this fake charity event to launder her reputation before she took the money and ran. On the camera feed inside the salon, I watched her pacing back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. She was calling catering companies. She was ordering 5 cases of champagne. She was demanding ice sculptures. Chad was sitting on the sofa, looking pale and nauseous. He held his head in his hands. "Latrice, stop!" he moaned. "We cannot afford this. We do not have money for caterers. Rico is only giving us $500,000. You are spending $50 grand on a party for a boat we are selling in 24 hours. Latrice spun around, her eyes manic and bright. "You have no vision, Chad. We put it on Renee credit cards. By the time the bill comes due, we will be in Brazil. And we need this party. If we just sail away in the dark, it looks suspicious. But if we have a party and then the boat disappears, everyone will just think we took it for a midnight cruise to the Bahamas. It is the perfect alibi." She walked over to the mirror, admiring her reflection. She practiced her smile, the fake, humble smile of a philanthropist. "Besides," she whispered, "I want one night, just one night, where everyone looks at me and knows that I am the queen of this marina. I deserve this send-off." I leaned back in my hospital bed, watching her preen. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the most powerful people in Miami to see her standing on the deck of the Obsidian Pearl. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "Be careful what you wish for, little sister. You wanted the chief of police at your party? You got him. You wanted the press to cover your event. They will be there. You are building a stage for a tragedy, and you do not even know that you are the villain of the play." I moved my cursor to the email tab. I had one more invitation to send. I forwarded the event details to the FBI special agent in charge of my case. The guest list was officially complete. The green progress bar on my laptop screen hit 100%. Transfer complete. 2 gigabytes of high-definition video and crystal-clear audio were now sitting on the secure server of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I closed the laptop with a satisfying mechanical snap. Seated across from me in the small private conference room of the hospital was Special Agent Miller. He was a man who had spent 20 years dismantling drug cartels and chasing organized crime, but even he looked disturbed by what he had just watched. He stared at the tablet in his hands, scrolling through the file names I had organized for him. The confession, the forgery, the sale, the burglary. He shook his head slowly. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice grave. "Usually we have to spend months building a case like this. We have to request wiretaps, we have to chase paper trails through shell companies, we have to flip witnesses. You have done our entire job for us. You just handed us a conviction on a silver platter." He set the tablet down on the metal table and looked me in the eye. He started counting on his fingers, ticking off the charges with a professional detachment that sounded like a symphony to my ears. "Count 1, attempted first-degree murder. Count 2, grand larceny of a maritime vessel valued over $1 million. Count 3, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Count 4, interstate trafficking of stolen property. And Count 5, forgery of federal documents." That is 5 separate federal indictments. We are not talking about probation here. We are talking about mandatory minimums. If the judge is in a bad mood, they are looking at 30 years to life in a federal penitentiary. Each. I nodded. I did not smile. This was not happy news. It was justice. and justice is cold. Miller stood up and adjusted his shoulder holster. We have tactical teams moving into position at the marina right now. We know about the party. We know about the buyer arriving at 8 o'clock. We are going to let the transaction happen. We need to catch them in the act of exchanging the cash for the fraudulent title. Once that money touches your brother-in-law's hand, we move in. We are going to turn that charity gala into a federal crime scene. Miller paused at the door, looking at my bandaged leg. You should stay here, Ms. Jenkins. It will be chaotic. You are still recovering. I shook my head slowly. No, Agent. I need to be there. I need them to see me. They think they are mourning a ghost. I want them to see the resurrection. Miller looked at me for a long moment, seeing the fire in my eyes. Then he nodded. He left the room, leaving me alone with the garment bag hanging on the door. I stood up, ignoring the dull ache in my muscle. I unzipped the bag. Inside was not a hospital gown. It was not sweatpants. It was a suit I had commissioned in Italy for my biggest contract signing. Pure white silk, sharp tailored shoulders, wide leg trousers that would perfectly hide the bandage on my calf. I shed the identity of the victim. I put on the silk blouse, buttoning it to the neck. I pulled on the trousers. Finally, I slipped into the white blazer. It fit like armor. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the sad, desperate daughter who just wanted her parents to love her. She was a CEO. She was a survivor. And she was the executioner. I applied a layer of deep red lipstick, war paint. The party was starting in 2 hours. My family was expecting a buyer. They were expecting a celebration. They were not expecting the woman in the white suit coming to burn their house of cards to the ground. The Miami skyline shimmered like a mirage, reflecting off the black water of the marina. The obsidian pearl was transformed. Strings of white fairy lights draped from the radar arch to the bow railing, turning my vessel into a floating palace of light. From the dock, it looked like a dream. But from where I stood, watching the surveillance feed on my tablet, it looked like a crime scene disguised as a gala. Jazz music drifted through the air, soft and sophisticated, masking the rot underneath. Latrice stood at the top of the gangway. She was wearing a gold sequined gown that hugged every curve, a dress she bought with my credit card 3 hours ago. She held a flute of champagne like a scepter. She was greeting the guests with a practiced smile, touching arms, kissing cheeks, playing the role of the benevolent heiress to perfection. "Thank you for coming," she cooed to a city councilman. "We are so passionate about ocean conservation. It is what my sister would have wanted." She spoke of me in the past tense. She wiped a fake tear from her eye, and the councilman nodded sympathetically, completely unaware that the woman he was mourning was currently watching him from a black SUV parked 200 yards away. On the aft deck, my parents were holding court. They sat on the white leather sofas I had imported from Italy, looking relaxed for the first time in years. My mother, Patrice, swirled her wine glass. She looked at the crowd of well-dressed socialites filling the deck and let out a long, satisfied sigh. "You know, Vernon," she said, her voice carrying over the music, "I hate to say it, but everything just runs smoother without her. Renee always brought this heavy energy. She was so intense, so controlling. Look at this party. It is light. It is fun. People are actually smiling." My father, Vernon, nodded, taking a bite of a canapé. He looked around the boat that he had done nothing to earn, and smiled. "She never understood that life is about connections, Patrice. She thought it was all about work. That is why she was always alone. Honestly, this is a relief. We can finally breathe. We can finally be the family we were meant to be. They clinked their glasses, toasting to their new life, a life built on the erasure of their own daughter. They did not feel guilt. They felt liberated. It was the banality of evil in its purest form. But while the champagne flowed on the upper deck, the real business was happening in the dark shadows of the lower swim platform. The music was muffled down here. The air smelled of diesel and fear. Chad was standing near the tender garage. He was not smiling. He was shaking. Rico, the smuggler, stepped out of a small, unlit speedboat that had pulled up alongside the yacht. He did not look like a guest. He looked like an executioner. He handed Chad a heavy black duffel bag. Chad unzipped it. Inside were stacks of used $100 bills. $500,000. The price of my life. The price of my soul. Rico held out his hand. The papers. Chad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the forged bill of sale. The paper was slightly damp from his sweaty hands. He handed it over. "It is all there," Chad whispered, looking over his shoulder. "Signed and dated. The title is clear." Rico shined a small flashlight on the signature. He traced the curve of the forged name. He nodded slowly. "Good. My crew will board in 20 minutes. Get your guests off the boat, or they are going for a ride to Mexico." Chad nodded frantically, clutching the bag of money to his chest. He turned to run back up the stairs, back to the light, back to the party. He thought he had made it. He thought the nightmare was over. He did not know that the moment his hand touched that money, the trap had snapped shut. The time for games was over. The time for judgment had arrived. The clock struck 9. The timing was synchronized to the second. One moment, the air was filled with the sophisticated notes of a jazz saxophone and the clinking of expensive crystal. The next moment, there was silence. It was not a fade-out. It was a hard cut. The music system died instantly, plunging the party into a confused murmur. The sudden absence of sound was violent. People looked around, holding their drinks, waiting for an announcement or a technical apology. Instead, they got a movie premiere. On the upper sun deck, the massive 200-inch LED screen flickered to life. I had installed this screen for outdoor movie nights and displaying navigation charts. Tonight, it was the screen of judgment. The brightness was set to maximum, blindingly white against the dark night sky, forcing every single guest to turn and look. Static hissed through the wall speakers, a harsh, scratching sound that made the guests cover their ears. Then, the image resolved. It was not a promotional video for ocean conservation. It was grainy black and white footage. The timestamp in the corner read, 48 hours ago. The angle was wide and high, looking down from the top of the radar arch. It was a blind spot camera I had installed specifically to monitor the propeller wash. My family did not know it existed. They thought the stern was private. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd on the deck. The video was crystal clear. It showed the back of the yacht in the middle of the open ocean. 2 figures came into the frame. One was Chad dragging a limp, unconscious body by the arms. That was me. The other figure was walking behind him, holding a glass of wine. It was Latrice. On the screen, the digital version of Latrice pointed to the railing. She did not look sad. She did not look conflicted. She looked impatient. The guests watched in horrified silence as Chad lifted my body. They saw my head loll back completely helpless. Then came the moment that froze the blood of everyone present. On the screen, Latrice stepped forward and placed her hands on my unconscious form and shoved. It was a violent, dismissive motion, like she was throwing a bag of trash into a dumpster. My body tumbled over the side and hit the water with a splash that echoed through the speakers. Latrice, on the screen, dusted off her hands, took a sip of her wine, and laughed. The screen froze on that frame, Latrice laughing, while her sister drowned. On the real deck, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of a graveyard. 300 of Miami's most powerful people turned their heads in unison. They looked from the screen to the woman standing at the top of the stairs in the gold sequin dress. Latrice dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the teak floor, but the sound was tiny compared to the devastation unfolding around her. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She tried to back away, but she bumped into the railing. There was nowhere to run. The monster was not under the bed. The monster was wearing gold sequins, and she had just been exposed to the world. The visual was damning, but the audio was the nail in the coffin. The speakers crackled one last time, amplifying the voice of the woman sitting on the white leather sofa. It was not a synthesized voice. It was the unmistakable haughty drawl of my mother, Patrice. The recording played the last words she said to me before the drugs took full effect. "Consider this a reset button, Renee. When you wake up, maybe you will learn to share." The words hung in the humid air like a toxic cloud. Learn to share. She was talking about my life as if it were a toy she could just take away because I refused to play by her rules. The recording cut out, leaving a ringing silence that was louder than any scream. The reaction on the deck was visceral. It was not just silence anymore. It was the sound of illusion shattering. A prominent banker standing near the bar dropped his glass. The crystal hit the teak deck and exploded, but no one looked down. Everyone was looking at Patrice. The woman who had been playing the grieving mother 5 minutes ago was now revealed as the architect of the crime. She shrank back into the sofa, her face draining of color, her mouth opening and closing silently as she tried to find a lie that would fit. But there were no lies left. The truth was broadcasting at 100 decibels. Then the paralysis broke. A collective murmur of horror swept through the crowd. People began to back away from my parents as if cruelty was a contagious disease. Latrice snapped. The facade of the elegant hostess evaporated instantly. She looked at the giant screen and then at the guests judging her. Panic overrode her senses. She lunged toward the AV control panel near the DJ booth, screaming like a banshee. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat. "Turn it off right now! Who is doing this? Who is pranking me?" She started smashing buttons with her fists, desperate to kill the feed. She clawed at the wires, trying to rip them out of the wall. She looked deranged. Her gold sequin dress was flashing under the strobe lights, making her look like a malfunctioning robot. "This is fake!" she yelled, turning to the crowd with wild eyes. "This is AI generated. Someone is trying to sabotage my charity event. Do not look at it. It is not real." But no one was buying it. You can fake a photo. You can fake a voice. But you cannot fake the raw, unfiltered malice that everyone had just witnessed. They saw the hate in her eyes on that screen. They heard the callousness in my mother voice. I watched from the darkness of my car and felt a cold satisfaction. Scream all you want, Latrice, break the equipment, tear down the screen. It does not matter. You cannot unplug the truth. The seed has been planted. Every single person on that boat is now a witness for the prosecution. You wanted to be the center of attention. You wanted the spotlight. Well, soak it in, little sister. This is the performance of a lifetime, and you are bombing on a global stage. The party was over. The music had died, and the screaming had stopped, replaced by a sound much more terrifying. The deep, guttural roar of high-displacement diesel engines surrounded the Obsidian Pearl. From the darkness of the harbor, 4 Coast Guard patrol boats erupted into view. They did not approach cautiously. They swarmed. Within seconds, 4 million candle power of blinding white searchlights slammed into the yacht. The light was so intense, it turned the night into a harsh, clinical day. There were no shadows left to hide in. Every lie, every stolen jewel, and every drop of sweat was now exposed under the unforgiving glare of federal authority. On the dock, a sleek black government SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly onto the pier and came to a halt right at the base of the gangway. The crowd on the boat fell into a stunned silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The back door of the SUV opened with a heavy mechanical thud. First came the white stiletto heel hitting the asphalt, then the sharp, tailored line of the white trouser leg. I stepped out of the car. I stood up to my full height, smoothing the lapels of my silk blazer. I did not look at the police boats. I did not look at the flashing lights. I kept my eyes locked on the top of the gangway. I began to walk. The guests on the main deck were packed shoulder to shoulder, but as I stepped onto the boat, a miracle happened. They did not need to be told to move. The sheer force of my presence made them recoil. They parted like the Red Sea. A wide path cleared instantly down the center of the deck. I walked through the tunnel of people. I heard their gasps. I heard them whispering my name as if they were seeing a spirit return from the grave. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I was no longer the quiet mechanic they used to ignore. I was the woman who crawled out of the ocean to take back her kingdom. I reached the center of the deck where Latrice was standing. She was trembling so violently that the sequins on her dress made a soft rattling sound. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She looked at my face. She looked at my legs, which were supposed to be broken. She looked at my chest, which was supposed to be filled with water. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She just whimpered a pathetic animal sound of disbelief. She took a stumbling step back, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto her knees. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She was waiting for me to scream. She was waiting for me to hit her. But I did nothing. I simply stood there, towering over her in my white suit, calm and untouched. I was the Statue of Liberty, and she was the wreckage at my feet. Latrice stared up at me, her eyes wide and glassy. She reached out a trembling hand as if to touch the hem of my white trousers to make sure I was real. Her voice was barely a whisper, a broken sound of confusion and guilt. "Renee," she stammered, You are alive. I thought..." I did not let her finish. I did not want to hear her excuses. I did not want to hear another lie about how it was an accident or a misunderstanding. I pulled my hands back and put every ounce of my pain, every second of my fear, and every drop of my rage into one motion. My palm connected with her cheek. The sound was like a gunshot. It echoed across the silent deck, causing the crowd to flinch. Latrice's head snapped to the side and she fell onto her hands, gasping. It was the only time in my life I had ever touched her in anger. It was violent, it was raw, and it was necessary. I leaned down, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. You thought what, Latrice? You thought I was dead. You thought the sharks had finished me off. You thought you could wash my blood off this deck and sell my masterpiece for scrap metal. She looked up at me, holding her stinging cheek, tears streaming down her face. She tried to speak, but I silenced her with a look. You did not just try to kill me, I continued. You tried to discount me. You sold my life for a fraction of what I am worth, because you were too lazy to understand the value of hard work. You are not a victim. You are a parasite. I stood up and turned my back on her, leaving her sobbing on the floor. I locked eyes with Chad. He was standing near the rail, clutching the duffel bag of money to his chest like a life preserver. He looked like he was about to vomit. He tried to back away, but he bumped into the solid chest of a federal agent who had quietly stepped onto the boat behind him. I walked over to Chad. I reached out and plucked the forged bill of sale from his sweating fingers. He was too terrified to stop me. I held the document up to the light, examining the signature he had spent all night practicing. I have to admit, Chad, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, it is a work of art. The loops are perfect, the slant is consistent. You really mastered the shape of my name. Chad swallowed hard, his eyes darting back and forth, seeking an escape that did not exist. But you forgot one detail, I said, stepping closer to him until I could smell the fear on him. You forgot the one thing that a husband should know about his sister-in-law, after 10 years of family dinners. I held up my left hand, wiggling my fingers. I am left-handed, Chad. When I write, my hand drags across the page. The ink flow is different. The pressure points are inverted. But you are right-handed. I dropped the paper onto his chest. You signed this document with a right-handed slant. Any forensic handwriting expert would have spotted it in 5 seconds. You did not just forge a document. You signed your own confession. You are not just a murderer, Chad. You are an incompetent one. And that is why you are going to lose everything. The silence following my words to Chad did not last long. It was shattered by the sound of heavy tactical boots hitting the teak deck. The raid was executed with surgical precision. A dozen federal agents and windbreakers emblazoned with FBI swarmed the deck of the Obsidian Pearl. There was no room for negotiation. There was no room for bribery. This was the hammer of the law, coming down on a family that thought they were above it. Special Agent Miller stepped forward. He did not yell. He did not have to. His voice cut through the humid night air with the absolute weight of the United States government behind it. Chadwick Miller, Latrice Jenkins, Vernon Jenkins, Patrice Jenkins, you are all under arrest. I stepped back, leaning against the railing in my pristine white suit, watching the dismantling of my family. 2 agents grabbed Chad. He tried to run, but he barely made it 2 steps before he was tackled to the ground. The duffel bag of cash spilled open, sending stacks of $100 bills scattering across the deck like confetti at a twisted parade. I heard the sound. Click, click. The sound of stainless steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Latrice was screaming. She was kicking and flailing, shouting that she was an influencer and that they could not touch her. An female agent spun her around and pinned her against the wet bar. "You have the right to remain silent, Latrice," the agent said calmly while tightening the cuffs. "I suggest you use it." My parents were next. My father, Vernon, tried to use his command voice, the one he used to belittle me for years. He puffed out his chest. "Do you know who I am? This is a mistake. Get your hands off me!" The agent did not even blink. He spun my father around and slammed him against the bulkhead. "Your status does not work here, Mr. Jenkins. You are facing federal charges." Agent Miller pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and read the indictment out loud for the entire party to hear. "You are being charged with piracy under the High Seas Act, violation of the Jones Act regarding maritime fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and attempted first-degree murder of a U.S. citizen." The word murder hung in the air. The guests gasped. My mother, Patrice, went limp. The reality finally hit her. This was not a game. She was not going to a hotel. She was going to a cell. Then came the finale. I looked toward the dock and gave a subtle nod. The barrier tape was lowered. A sea of reporters and cameramen that I had personally tipped off rushed forward. The night exploded with the strobe light effect of hundreds of camera flashes. My family had always wanted to be famous. They wanted to be on the front page. Now they were getting their wish. The agents began to march them down the gangway. It was a walk of shame broadcast live to the world. Chad hung his head. Latrice tried to hide her face with her hair. My parents looked old and broken. As they passed me, they looked up. They were waiting for me to save them. They were waiting for Renee the fixer to make it all go away. But I just stood there, unmovable, unreachable. I watched them being shoved into the back of the armored vans. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing their fate. The sirens wailed, piercing the night, as the convoy drove away, leaving me alone on the deck of my ship. I picked up a glass of champagne that had been left on a table. I walked to the bow and looked out at the ocean. The water was calm. The air was fresh. I took a sip. It tasted like freedom. The fluorescent lights hummed in the small, windowless room inside the Federal Detention Center. It was a stark contrast to the soft mood lighting of the Obsidian Pearl. Vernon and Patrice Jenkins were no longer holding court on a luxury yacht. They were sitting in separate metal chairs, handcuffed to a steel table stripped of their jewelry and their dignity. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. In interview room 1, Vernon was sweating through his linen shirt. He looked at Special Agent Miller with pleading eyes, trying to play the card of the confused elderly father. He leaned forward, rattling his chains against the table. "Agent, please, you have to understand," he stammered. "I am a sick man. I have a heart condition. I did not know what was happening. It was that boy, Chad. He is a criminal. He has a gambling problem. He forced us onto that boat. He told me he rented it legally. I had no idea he stole it from Renee. I am a victim here. I just wanted to take a nap." "You cannot put an old man in jail for the actions of his son-in-law." Agent Miller did not say a word. He just took notes with a blank expression and walked out, leaving Vernon alone with his lies. He entered interview room 2. Patrice was putting on an even bigger performance. She had summoned tears on command. Her mascara was running down her face in dark streaks, making her look like a tragic figure in a soap opera. She clasped her hands together in a prayer motion, trembling visibly. "I am just a mother," she sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly. "I do not know anything about maritime laws. I just do what my husband tells me. Vernon and Chad made all the decisions. I was just sitting there. I was terrified the whole time. I love Renee. She is my baby. I would never hurt my own daughter. How can you accuse a mother of such a thing?" Agent Miller sat down slowly. He did not offer her a tissue. He placed a digital tablet on the cold steel table face up. He looked at her with eyes that had seen every kind of criminal, and he knew exactly what she was. "Mrs. Jenkins, you say you were a passive observer. You say you love your daughter and that you were scared. But we have digital forensics from the yacht security system, specifically a conversation recorded on the sun deck yesterday afternoon." He pressed play. The audio filled the small concrete room, bouncing off the walls. It was Patrice's voice, loud and clear. There was no sadness in it. There was no fear, only malice and arrogance. The recording played. "Let her sit there for a couple of days. Let her get hungry. Let the sun blister her skin. She needs to be broken to fit back into this family." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Patrice stopped crying instantly. The tears evaporated. The trembling stopped. The mask fell completely. She stared at the tablet, her mouth hanging open. She realized that her own voice had just convicted her. There was no Chad to blame. There was no Vernon to hide behind. It was her words, her cruelty, her hate. She looked up at Agent Miller, but he was already standing up to leave. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but the words died in her throat. For the first time in her life, the manipulative matriarch was absolutely silent. She slumped back in her chair, staring at the wall, realizing that she was not going to a gala. She was going to prison, and she had sent herself there. In interview room 3, the illusion of the devoted husband crumbled instantly. Chad was not built for prison. The air conditioning in the room was cold, but he was sweating so profusely that his shirt was clinging to his chest. He looked at the federal prosecutor sitting across from him. He did not ask for a lawyer. He asked for a deal. He leaned across the metal table, his eyes wide with panic and desperation. "I will tell you everything," he said, his voice shaking. "I will give you the dates. I will give you the bank accounts. I will give you the passwords. Just do not put me in general population. You have to cut me a deal." The prosecutor simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. Chad cracked wide open. He pointed a trembling finger at the wall that separated him from his wife. "It was Latrice," he stammered. "It was all her idea. I did not want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to pay off my debts. But she pushed me. She is the one who planned the trip. She is the one who drugged the orange juice. She is the one who pushed Renee off the boat. I just drove the yacht. I am just the driver. She is the mastermind. She wanted the money. She wanted the fame. She is the monster, not me." He buried his face in his hands, weeping, not out of remorse for what he did to me, but out of pity for himself. He sold out his wife in less than 5 minutes to save his own skin. Meanwhile, in interview room 4, Latrice was putting on a display of pure, unadulterated narcissism. She was not crying. She was screaming. She was pacing the small concrete room like a caged tiger, slamming her handcuffed wrists against the two-way mirror. She did not care about the charges. She cared about her image. "This is a setup," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. "This is harassment. My sister orchestrated this whole thing to humiliate me." The agent standing by the door crossed his arms and looked at her with disgust. "Ms. Jenkins, you are on video pushing your sister into the ocean. We have your husband confession." Latrice spun around, her eyes wild with delusion. "Chad is a liar and a coward," she spat. "And Renee is the real villain here. Do you not see it? She has always been jealous of me. She has always been jealous because I am the pretty one. I am the one with the personality. She is just a boring mechanic who thinks she is better than everyone else." She sat down heavily in the chair, breathing hard. She looked the agent dead in the eye, completely detached from reality. "I am the victim here," she said with absolute conviction. "She stole my party. She stole my moment. She ruined my life on purpose. She should have just stayed dead. If she really loved this family, she would have died on that sandbar and let us be happy. She is selfish. She is the worst sister in the world." The agent shook his head and turned off the recording. There was no point in arguing with insanity. Latrice did not see a crime. She only saw a spotlight that was no longer shining on her. She sat in the silence of the room, fuming with hate, convinced until the bitter end that she was the princess in a tragedy written by everyone else. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally crush you, they grind you into dust. 3 months had passed since the night of the raid. The federal courthouse in Miami was packed to capacity. The press gallery was overflowing. Everyone wanted to see the final chapter of the scandal that had gripped the city. I sat in the witness box. I was not wearing the white suit of the avenging angel today. I was wearing a sharp navy blue business suit. I looked like what I was: a CEO, an engineer, a survivor. To my left sat the defendant's table, my family. They were no longer wearing designer clothes. They were wearing standard-issue federal orange jumpsuits. They looked smaller. The arrogance had been bleached out of them by 90 days in a detention cell. My mother, Patrice, tried to catch my eye. She put on a trembling smile, hoping to trigger some biological instinct of forgiveness in me. But I did not look at her. I did not look at any of them. To me, they were just empty chairs. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rodriguez, walked me through the events. She asked me to identify the evidence. "Ms. Jenkins, can you tell the court what is shown in Exhibit C?" I leaned into the microphone. My voice was steady. It was cool. It was the voice of someone reading a technical manual. Exhibit C is a thermal imaging recording from the stern of the Obsidian Pearl. It shows the defendants Chadwick Miller and Latrice Jenkins dragging my unconscious body to the railing. It confirms that at 4:12 p.m. on the day in question, they threw me overboard while the vessel was in motion. I heard a sob from the defense table. It was Latrice. She was weeping into her hands. I did not flinch. I did not pause. I continued to present the facts. I listed the bank transfers. I explained the forgery techniques Chad used on the title. I played the audio of my mother wishing me dead. I laid out the architecture of their crime with the precision of a surgeon. Presiding over the case was Judge Harrison. He was a stern African-American man with graying hair and a face carved from granite. He had seen drug dealers, murderers, and thieves in his courtroom for 20 years. But as he listened to the audio of Patrice's voice saying, "I needed to be broken," he took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked down at the defendants with an expression of profound disgust. He looked at my parents not as a judge looks at a defendant, but as a father looks at a monster. He shook his head slowly. I have sat on this bench for 2 decades, Judge Harrison said, his voice low and rumbling. I have seen greed. I have seen violence. But rarely have I seen a family so willing to devour their own child for a few dollars. The callousness displayed in this evidence is chilling. He turned his gaze to me. His expression softened just a fraction. Ms. Jenkins, your testimony is noted. Your composure is remarkable, given the circumstances. You may step down. I gathered my files. I stood up. I walked past the defense table one last time. I could feel their eyes burning into me, desperate for acknowledgement, desperate for anger. They wanted me to scream at them because hate is still a connection. But I gave them nothing. I gave them the only thing worse than hate. I gave them absolute indifference. I walked out of the courtroom doors, and I did not look back. The courtroom was suspended in a thick, heavy silence. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic heartbeat of the accused. Judge Harrison shuffled the papers on his bench. He did not look up. He took a moment to let the gravity of the situation settle into the marrow of their bones. Then he looked at the defense table. Chadwick Miller and Latrice Jenkins, please stand. They stood up. Chad's legs were shaking so bad he had to lean on the table. Latrice stood stiffly, her chin tilted up, trying to maintain a shred of her delusional dignity. The judge spoke, his voice ringing like a church bell. For the crimes of attempted first-degree murder, piracy on the high seas, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud, the court finds you guilty on all counts. This was not a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated attempt to end a life for financial gain. Therefore, I am sentencing you both to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. Latrice let out a sharp gasp, like she had been punched in the stomach. 25 years. The judge continued, his eyes hard as flint. And let me be clear. In the federal system, there is no parole. You will serve every single day of that sentence. You walked into this courtroom as young people. You will leave it as middle-aged strangers to a world that has forgotten you. Chad put his head on the table and began to sob. Latrice looked around the room, wild-eyed, realizing that her youth, her beauty, and her influence had just been canceled. The judge then turned to my parents. Vernon and Patrice Jenkins, please stand. My parents stood up slowly. They looked small and fragile in their orange jumpsuits. They were clinging to the hope that their age would save them. The judge shook his head. You were the parents. You were supposed to be the protectors. Instead, you were accomplices to a tragedy. You chose greed over your own blood. For the charges of aiding and abetting and concealment of a felony, I sentence you both to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. At their age, it was effectively a life sentence. My mother, Patrice, let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. She reached out toward me across the aisle, her hands cuffed, screaming my name. But I did not move. The judge raised his gavel for the final blow. Furthermore, the court orders full restitution for the emotional and physical damages inflicted on the victim. All assets belonging to the defendants, including the family estate, the vehicles, and all investment accounts, are hereby seized. They will be liquidated, and the proceeds will be awarded to the plaintiff, Renee Jenkins. The gavel came down with a thunderous crack. Boom! It was over. They were not just going to prison. They were going to prison penniless. They had tried to steal my fortune, and in the end, they handed me theirs. I watched as the marshals moved in to take them away. They were dragged out the side door, kicking and screaming, leaving me sitting alone in the quiet courtroom. I was an orphan now, by choice and by law, and I had never felt richer. Federal Correctional Institution Tallahassee is a long way from the sparkling waters of Miami. There are no ocean views here. There is no room service. There are only cinder block walls painted a depressing shade of beige and the constant, maddening buzz of fluorescent lights that never truly turn off. I checked the prisoner logs from my office in the city. Inmate number 49201, Latrice Jenkins. The processing video told the whole story. The moment she entered the facility, the dismantling of her ego began. She stood in the intake room, still trying to hold on to a shred of her former self. A female guard with arms like tree trunks approached her. She pointed to Latrice. Hair. "Take it off," the guard barked. Latrice froze. Her hand went to her head. That wig was custom made. It cost $3,000. It was her armor. It was the only thing hiding the fact that her natural hair was thin and damaged from years of chemical treatments. I said, "Take it off," the guard repeated, stepping closer. "Or I take it off for you." With trembling fingers, Latrice unclipped the wig. She pulled it off, exposing her scalp to the cold air. She looked in the reflection of the plexiglass shield. The glamorous influencer was gone. Staring back was a scared, plain woman who looked 10 years older than her age. The guard tossed the expensive hairpiece into a plastic bin like it was a dead rat. Next came the clothes. The gold sequin dress was stripped away, replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. It was not tailored. It was baggy and stiff, made of a rough polyester that scratched the skin. It smelled of industrial detergent and the sweat of the inmate who wore it before her. Latrice pulled it on. It swallowed her whole. She was no longer a fashion icon. She was just a number. But the real punishment was not the wardrobe. It was the assignment. Latrice was assigned to sanitation duty in cell block C. I pictured the scene clearly. The woman who used to complain if her champagne was not chilled to the perfect degree was now on her knees on a cold concrete floor. In her hand was not a designer purse, but a cheap plastic toilet brush. She was scrubbing the stainless steel toilet in the communal bathroom. The smell of bleach and urine was overpowering, making her gag. She stopped for a moment, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. She looked at the inmate next to her, a hardened woman with a spiderweb tattoo on her neck. "You know," Latrice whispered, desperate for validation, "on the outside I am famous. I have over 100,000 followers on Instagram. People pay me just to wear their clothes." The woman stopped mopping. She looked down at Latrice with a look of pure pity mixed with amusement. "Honey," the woman said, her voice rough like gravel, "in here likes do not buy you protection. Followers do not buy you commissary. And that toilet does not care who you used to be. Keep scrubbing, or the guards will put you in the hole." Latrice looked back down at the toilet bowl. The water swirled murky and gray. It was the only mirror she had left. She realized then that her follower count was 0. Her influence was 0. She had traded her sister love for a digital fantasy, and now she was scrubbing away the filth of strangers just to survive the day. The influencer had finally influenced herself right into rock bottom. The sun was brighter today. The Atlantic Ocean was no longer a graveyard. It was a highway. I stood at the helm of my vessel. I had scraped the name Obsidian Pearl off the transom. That name belonged to a dead woman. The fresh black paint on the stern now read, "The Retribution." It was not just a name, it was a promise kept. My lawyer had handed me a single envelope before I left the dock. It was sitting on the console next to the compass. It was gray and cheap, made of recycled prison paper. The return address was stamped in red ink. Federal Correctional Institution, Tallahassee. Inmate Patrice Jenkins. I looked at the letter. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it carried the weight of 30 years of manipulation. Inside, I knew there were pages of excuses, pages of guilt trips, pages of a mother trying to rewrite history to make herself look like the victim. She probably wrote about how much she missed me. She probably wrote that she forgave me for putting her in jail. She was trying to cast a hook from her cell, hoping to snag me one last time. I did not open it. I did not need to know what she had to say. Her voice had been in my head for my entire life, telling me I was not enough, telling me to share, telling me to be quiet. I was done listening. I walked to the stern of the boat, where the American flag snapped in the wind. I tore the envelope in half. The sound of ripping paper was satisfying. Then I tore it again, and again, until the letter was nothing but a handful of white confetti. I held my hand over the railing. I opened my fingers. The wind caught the pieces instantly. They danced in the air for a second, white flakes against the brilliant blue sky, before landing in the churning white water of the wake. I watched them sink. The ocean that they tried to use to kill me was now washing away their last words. They were gone, dissolved into the salt and the foam. I walked back to the bridge. The air tasted clean. I sat in the captain chair. It fit me perfectly. I looked at the horizon. It was empty. No parents to please, no sister to bail out, no husband to fear. Just me and the endless blue. I reached forward and wrapped my hand around the throttle. The engines responded with a deep, powerful growl that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the heartbeat of my ship, and it beat in time with my own. I pushed the levers all the way forward. The bow rose up, cutting through the waves with authority. The Retribution surged ahead, leaving the land and the past behind. I felt a smile spread across my face. It was not a cold smile of revenge. It was a warm, genuine smile of peace. The wind whipped through my hair, drying the last of the tears I would ever shed for them. I checked my course. Due east, into the sunrise. I was not just sailing a boat. I was sailing into the rest of my life. And for the first time in 30 years, I was truly free. The most dangerous betrayals often come from those who share our blood. Renee's story teaches us that resilience is not just about surviving the storm, but mastering it. When the people supposed to protect you become your executioners, you must stop seeking their validation and start building your own defense. True power is not found in violence, but in the absolute refusal to be a victim. Sometimes you have to let the toxic parts of your life drown so you can finally breathe. Your value is not defined by who loves you, but by the empire you build for yourself. If you have ever had to burn a bridge just to light your own way forward, hit that like button and subscribe to see more justice served cold.